Before we get started, I wanted to just briefly go over an outline of what we're going to talk about during this talk today. So first, I'm going to do a brief introduction to Phoenix LiveView, and then that naturally leads into why use JavaScript with it. Then we'll walk through project setup, making our server-side markup. Then we'll move to the client side and define our hooks. Then we'll move back to the server side, talk about handle events that come from those hooks, and then the last step is pushing events from client to server. First, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have videos about development, design, product design, more videos like this. And just a little bit about myself. I'm a senior front-end developer at Headway. I'm really passionate about teaching folks front-end development. And my buddy there in the bottom right corner, that's Zeppelin. So that's a little personal note about myself. He's my office mate right now. Okay, so what are we building as part of this talk? We're building this app. It's pretty simple. It has a pool. So that's what those blue boxes are. And you can drag items from the pool into Dropzone A or Dropzone B. You can drag them between. You can drag them back into the pool. And we're going to do this using Phoenix LiveView. So if you're not familiar with Phoenix LiveView, it's server rendered HTML. And what's great about it is it's declarative. So you have events and they cause your LiveView state to update. And your LiveView state is just your Elixir data structures that you're familiar with. And then once that state changes, the relevant parts of your HTML templates that you write as part of Phoenix LiveView are re-rendered, and those changes are pushed to the browser. And then it just lets the browser update itself. So, you know, you get the efficient browser updates and you're still getting quick reactions to user events. The best part though is you write the templates and you let LiveView track the changes and send diffs to your browser. So you might compare this to like an alternative stack might be using Phoenix without LiveView and then having a React app, for instance, and then using fetch within the React app to grab data out of your Phoenix or Elixir backend. And Phoenix LiveView just makes it so that you don't need that extra piece. Phoenix LiveView, it's great for user interactions like I've listed here, events and updates from the server, and page navigation, among other things. And that link there in the slides, which Jacob, I think the slides will be made available later. That's just a link to more use cases that LiveView has for you to review. So if LiveView is so great, why do we want to use JavaScript? LiveView, the documentation says it itself, and I've just put it here. The emphasis is mine. Animations, menus, general UI events that do not need the server in the first place are a bad fit for LiveView. And they just point out that you can use CSS, CSS transitions, LiveView hooks, and then also integrating other toolkits. And I've emphasized LiveView hooks because that's actually what we'll be using in this demonstration. So first we'll start with an empty LiveView project, and I've just quickly here summarized what the steps of those are. There's some terminal commands, some steps of removing boilerplate that you get anytime you generate projects like this. But down at the bottom, I've just made a note there that there is an accompanying blog post for this talk. It goes into great detail about all the steps that you need to walk through. It has a lot of screenshots and code samples. So I encourage you to check that out as well if you want to revisit any of these parts in detail. In terms of styling and JavaScript, in my example, I'm just using Tailwind. It's pretty simple. And I'm just using the CDN for Tailwind. And then for our JavaScript dependencies, I'm including Sortable. So Sortable lets you implement drag and drop functionality really simply. It has a lot of different options and great documentation. So here's just a terminal command on how you would add this. Okay, so we'll start with our PageLive module. Whenever you have these modules, the minimum callbacks that you need for a LiveView module is a mount callback. And so what I've done in mount to set us up for this project is I've added an array of draggables, or a list of draggables. And this is hard-coded, but in a real app, this would come from a data source. And I've just made 4 draggables. They're just labeled drag me 0 through 3. And then in my socket, I've assigned 3 assigns. So there's the pool, so that's where they start. And then there's Dropzone A, which has a list that's empty, and then Dropzone B, which also has a list that's empty. So now we can start working on the templates. So this is our markup piece of that outline. The Dropzone LiveComponent is a component that we'll use for our Dropzone A and our Dropzone B. And it receives 4 assigns. So here in our live EEx, so this is like our HTML template code. It has the assigns that are going to come from our PageLive template. So it's going to get a color. So in the GIF that I showed earlier, that was the green and the orange. It'll get a Dropzone ID, which we'll need this later when we are handling client-side events and we want to know which Dropzone a draggable was dropped into. It'll have a title that's just to label the Dropzone, and then it will have a draggables list that it gets. And with that draggables list, we'll just iterate over it using a for loop, and we'll get the text and the ID out of the draggable, and then we'll render the draggable as a div. We just want to make sure that we give it draggable true. So this is from HTML5, and it just means that we can drag the element around the page. One other thing you'll want to do is make sure that you give it a class draggable, which we'll use later with our sortable implementation. We'll use this as a selector to know which items are draggable from the sortable options. So once we've implemented both of those, implemented that live component, we can pull it in for both of our drop zones. So here's our drop zone component, and then we just pass it drop zone A for the first one, the draggables, along with the other required assigns. And then for the second drop zone component, we'll give it drop zone B. And what we end up having is something that looks like this. And then the last piece is we just want to implement the pool. Since there's only one pool, I've just added it directly into the PageLive template. And it's similar, so it iterates over the pool list rather than Dropzone A or Dropzone B. And then it renders a div for each draggable that's in the pool. Again, it needs that draggable true as well as a class of draggable. So at this point, this is what we have. So we have our 4 draggables, and we can drag them around, but we can't actually drop them in either of our drop zones yet. So now we'll move to the client side. So we're going to add a drag hook, and hooks within the Phoenix LiveView JavaScript Interoperability API, they have different lifecycle callbacks that you can use. I've listed them here: mounted, before update, etc. In our drag hook, we're only going to use one of these lifecycle callbacks, and it's the mounted callback. And the mounted callback is called when an element is added to the DOM or when the live view is mounted. Or sorry, and when the live view is mounted. Within our mounted callback and within all of the lifecycle functions, we have several attributes in scope. So those are element, view name, push event to, and handle event. First, we're going to use just the element attribute in scope, and we're going to define our selector, which is just going to be a string, and it's going to let us know based on the ID of the element which drop zone we're concerned with, or which set of drop zones we're concerned with. So we'll start by just making a JavaScript file called draghook.js, and that's going to be in our assets folder of our Phoenix LiveView project. Then within our app.js file, so this is part of our Phoenix LiveView project by default. We don't have to do anything to create this file, but we'll just add an import for our drag hook function, and then we will create an object called hooks. It'll just be an object that has one key right now because we only have one hook, and the hook's name will be drag. And then in our LiveSocket instantiation, we will add hooks to our options, which is the second param, and it'll just be lowercase hooks, and we're just pointing it to our hooks object. Then in our PageLive template on the server side, we'll just add our hook by using the phx.-hook attribute. And we just want to make sure that this name drag here, I'm going to go back to the previous slide, matches this key here. And then one other thing to keep in mind is when you're using Phoenix hooks, you want to make sure that you also give a unique ID to the same DOM element. Otherwise, it won't work. Oh, and one other thing to point out is this ID here, drag, this is 2 slides previous, is this ID here that we're concerned with. Okay. Okay, so we've set up all of the skeleton for our client-side code, so now we can actually start working on implementing the drag and drop. So what we'll do is we'll use document.querySelectorAll, and we're going to look for all components or all DOM elements that have a class of Dropzone. And then for each of those drop zones, so we have 3 of those currently in our template. We have our pool, we have Dropzone A and Dropzone B. So for each of those drop zones that we get back from the query selector all, we're going to instantiate a new sortable. For the first param, we'll just pass it that Dropzone element. And then for the second param, it's going to be an object of options for sortable. There's a lot of different options that you can pass in, and you can look at the sortable documentation, but just to give you a brief overview of the ones that I've used here. Animation and delay, those are seconds. So animation, I just have that for 0 seconds. There's no animation. Delay is 50, that's the default. So just a 50, I think it's millisecond delay. So delay on touch only, this just says we only want to delay the interaction if it's via touch, so not mouse or keyboard. And then group, this one's important because we want to make sure that we're able to drag things from the pool into Dropzone A and from Dropzone A into Dropzone B, that they all share the same draggables. If we didn't set this group and then use the same shared attribute on all of them, you can only drag items within any one drop zone, which is good if you want to have something like sorting, like maybe prioritize things in a list, but if you want to move them between drop zones, you need to set this key. This draggable class, I pointed that out a little bit earlier. This is just the selector that Sortable uses to figure out which items are draggable. And then this last one, ghost class, Sortable ghost. This one just styles the drop placeholder. So in my source code, you can look at this class. It's just in a plain CSS file, and it just gives it like an opacity of 0.75. Okay, so this is what our app is looking like now, this far. So we're almost there. What you'll notice is different from the first GIF that I showed you is that when you drop items into Dropzone A and Dropzone B, they're not changing color. And the reason for that is that the server-side module doesn't know when these drop events are happening. And so that's what we will work on next. So the way that we're going to communicate this is through events. And so here I've shown sort of the client side and the server side direction that events are going to go. So to that sortable options object that I was just showing you, I've added an on-in end callback. And I've just put a placeholder right now where the implementation will go. Once this is implemented, when this on-end function is called, it will send an event that will handle with a handle event callback in our PageLive module. So in the handle event module, or callback in our module, it's going to take as its params an event, which I've just identified here by naming it dropped. It'll take some parameters that will pass with the event, and then like all of our callbacks in our module, it will take a socket. So in our drag hook JavaScript file, we're going to call hook.pushEvent2, and this will push our event to our live view. And the selector will tell us which template we are concerned with, and so that is our PageLive template. And then dropped is the event. So this dropped string here should match the dropped string here so that LiveView knows where to handle it. The last parameter here is our payload object. So this is the data that we need to make available to the server side so it knows like what happened with this event. So the first piece of data that we're going to give it is the dragged ID. So this is the ID of the dragged item. Then we're going to give the ID of the drop zone where the item was dropped. And then the last piece is the index of the draggable, and this is relative to its siblings. So once it's dropped in the drop zone, was it dropped at the top of the drop zone? Was it dropped after everything else, somewhere in the middle? That's what we'll use this ID for. So we'll do push event 2, and that'll push it to our page. And then you can see in our handle event, I've just went ahead and added our dragged ID, drop zone ID, and draggable index to the handle event function. I'm just using pattern matching here to get them right out of the payload in the function declaration. And in my blog post, I walk through in more details exactly how you can go ahead and update your socket assigns. But just to give you a quick overall view, we will identify the drop zone, like which drop zone it was dropped into. If somehow we get an invalid drop zone, we'll just throw an error. If we make it past the possibility of throwing an error, we'll look for the dragged item based on the dragged ID. And then the last bit is updating our lists in the socket assigns. And I have several helper functions here that I've defined. And I will just share them here on this slide. So find dragged, update list, and remove dragged. These are more just Elixir fundamentals, but again, if you're interested in knowing how these work, I go into detail in the blog post about how you can update your socket assigns. And then we're done. So as you drop your different draggables into the drop zones, Sortable will use that on end to call our hooks.pushEvent2. It'll push it to our PageLive module, and then it can update the state accordingly. So your next steps, I've provided a link to the source code here. Also, there's a link to the blog post on headway.io on our website. I have two Phoenix LiveView resources. So the first one is the Phoenix LiveView documentation about JavaScript interoperability. This was a great one to look at because in this demonstration, I've shown drag and drop as a specific example, but there's a lot of great use cases for JavaScript interoperability if you want to let the client take care of some of the functionality and then just make necessary events known to the server. I've also provided a link here. This is a walkthrough of Elixir LiveView with Elixir School. Elixir School has a lot of great resources. And then when we originally posted this blog post, Pedro here, he reached out to me and said that he had implemented something similar with LiveView to make a Trello clone. And so I've linked here, the first link is his Elixir source code, and then the second link is his JavaScript. So you can see how he implemented it, but he also used hooks. So it should look familiar, but you can see a different implementation. And if anyone has any questions, I can answer those now. One other thing I wanted to share is we learned all of this about JavaScript interoperability and Sortable because we used it in our app Birdseye. So Birdseye is an app that lets you consolidate all of your tasks into one view, and we invite you to check it out.
All right, thank you, Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have a question from YouTube. I'm trying to read this correctly. I would like to see how it was implemented, how the components were implemented.
Okay, you know, maybe I could do a quick code walkthrough as well.
Sure.
If we have time. Okay. Let me just open it up and share my screen. So we can kind of orient ourselves within the app itself. Okay, so I have the app opened here, or the code for it anyway. So this is the PageLive module that we were talking about. So it has our mount callback, and this all has the same code that I showed you. But then in the same folder, here's the PageLive template. So this is our Live EEx. So if you're familiar with Phoenix, you've used EEx before, and then this is just the LiveView version of it. And I have those two live components pulled in here, both the Dropzone component. And what happens is our socket has these three assigns: pool, Dropzone A, and Dropzone B. And so then in our template, we have access to @pool, @Dropzone A, and @Dropzone B. And the Dropzone component is also in this same folder. And it just has a render callback, and it has its own assigns. So it gets the @Dropzone ID here at the end, and then it gets the @title and @draggables from the assigns for it. And they're passed in right here. So Dropzone ID, title, oh, and the color. Forgot to point out the color. Does that answer the question?
We'll see. I know there's a slight delay between Zoom and YouTube, so.
Yeah, definitely. Let me know if there's any follow-up questions. Also, while we're in the code, I can show you within the Phoenix LiveView app, there's the assets folder and root, and then a JS folder, and that's where you can find app.js. And also, here's where I added my drag hook function. And in app.js, I just import drag from the drag hook file, create that hooks object, and then pass it through the options of LiveSocket. And most of this code is just part of generating your Phoenix LiveView project. I've just added, looks like line 19, line 21, and line 28. So not a lot to hook it up and get it working for you.
Awesome, thank you, Kelsey. Someone said, checking out the blog post now, thank you so much. And then Romanik said, yes, thanks. So that did answer his question.
Good, I'm glad.
Awesome.
I know sometimes it's helpful to see it in the code editor to kind of orient yourself.
For sure. Yeah, if anybody else has any questions about the presentation or just even anything with Phoenix LiveView, we're happy to answer. It's great to see more folks attending here on YouTube today than usual, so it's awesome. Oh, did you see the question over here, Kelsey, on Zoom?
Would you use web component instead of hooks in this situation? Jermaine, I'm not sure I know what you mean by web component. Could you elaborate a little bit?
We could invite him to ask in person to the.
Sure, I'll do my best to answer if I know what the answer is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi Jermaine.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, instead of using hook to talk to the LiveView process, can we not just change using a web component and maybe use the drag and drop web API a little bit more, and instead to just change the attribute of the web component and let the live view look at the attribute to know exactly what is the state of the drop zone.
Sure.
So you
yeah.
just in the, and then the live view doesn't know what is inside the web component. He knows only what the web components wants him to know with these attributes, right?
Yeah, actually, that sounds like a great possibility to explore. And the example that I shared of Pedro's repo, his JavaScript actually does just use the HTML API, but you also notice it's quite a bit longer. So if you're not very comfortable writing JavaScript, like if you're an Elixir developer who doesn't like to write very much JavaScript, like a great thing about Sortable is it just kind of abstracts all of that away for you. So you can just, just pass in some options and it basically works. But I agree with you that sounds like a viable solution. How would you make how would you publish the event so that the live view knew that the drop had happened? Do you have a sense of what that would be?
Well, I don't know, but I was thinking maybe the component, live view component, the live view process can watch the attributes of the web component. And then you just change this attribute. I mean, the web component will change its attributes, and then the live view process will just get these events and change the state of the drag zone and the which items in which drag zones, like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like it could be a good viable solution. As you were talking, I kind of realized I didn't voice over something, so this isn't in like contrary to what you were saying, but it just reminded me. So I had shown how we can move things around and drop them into the drop zones without implementing the hooks piece, but in our use case, we wanted to do it because maybe the next feature to add to this app is then using PubSub or something to publish that event information to make other modules aware of it, or maybe you're going to update the database or something like that. So as long as your solution generates some kind of event that you can handle, if your use case even needs that. So if you just want to be able to drag things around and there's no reason to make it known to the server, you can just leave hooks out altogether. But I really like the idea of exploring that your alternative solution as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine.
Thank you.
Kelsey, you should grab that Trello link just so we can share it with folks if they want to just take a look at it. The one that you have.
It's in the slides. Did you want me to do something else with it?
Yeah, could you just drop it in the chat?
Oh yeah.
So folks, yeah, and I could throw it over on YouTube as well in the chat. I know it's on your blog post, but we can definitely add it to the blog post after this too.
Yeah, definitely. So there's two links, just so everybody's aware. One is the Elixir code and the other is the JavaScript code. Yeah, and I let Pedro know that we would be referencing his blog post. So if you reach out to him over Twitter or GitHub, I'm sure he would be happy to talk to you as well if you had any questions for him.
Curlis asked, I was curious if there was an easy way to more tightly integrate a JavaScript hook with a live component than writing it in assets.
I'm not aware of an alternative way to do it. I would recommend maybe as a jumping off point, if you wanted to research that possibility, is that JavaScript interoperability page in the Phoenix LiveView docs. It's really comprehensive. So I think if it's possible, you'll maybe find the answer there, or at least find some hints. And I know a lot of folks use, now that I've thought about it a little for a minute or two more, I know a lot of folks use Alpine. It's not a library that I'm very familiar with or can speak to, but I know a lot of people have success for it, and you can find a lot of resources online. So maybe that would fulfill the desire of having it less, maybe it feels a little disjointed this way, but Alpine's another solution.
Oh, looks like we have someone. They just wanted to know if they could ask a general question. We can allow Mukesh to talk. Mukesh, if you have a question, feel free to ask.
Yeah. Hi, sir. Hi, ma'am. So,
Hi.
yeah. So basically, nowadays I'm working in Elixir, and I was facing some issue today. So the project that I am working on is to create an API gateway so that I can basically do all the validations and all the redirections from the API gateway for under the hood, there will be many microservices. So my question here is as of now, I'm able to insert the routes in the DB, but to match a particular route, for example, let's say I'm writing in the chat. So let's say API v1 and some service. So this kind of route. So here we will be matching a variable in the route, or you can say endpoint. So I was thinking of having a regex there so that we can match with all the possible all the routes that we have in the DB. But I thought that it will be little inefficient. So do you have any way to deal with this thing?
So I don't know that I have a specific implementation for you, but what I think may be a good place to start is you might think about writing a plug to do your route parsing and then using the value that you get out of the URL or the route, whatever you need to do, like process with that, either that's updating the database or I don't know what you do with those variables.
Yeah, so
but
I got it. So basically, the plug we can write, but yes, I feel that will, let's say that we have 100 routes in total. Okay, so I'll have to match all of them to get okay which service I need to call. So that was the problem that I was thinking that in the router.ex file, what we do is that, those routes are kind of compiled routes. So I feel that may be more efficient as compared to comparison to writing some plug, or you can say regex for that. So I was stuck there, so thought of asking.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say beyond kind of the direction I've kind of tried to point you in, but maybe if you want to follow up with us on our Twitter, we could.
Yeah, sure. I would definitely like to.
Okay, great. Yeah, it sounds like a interesting use case considering that you said you have, I think you just said hundreds of services.
No, hundreds of services. I'm saying that hundreds of routes. So services.
Oh, hundreds of routes.
Yes, services are around 8 to 10 services.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer for you, but
yes, I think that your answer was quite, I would say that satisfactory also, because I'm working on this problem from past few days. So basically I have figured out all the things, but yes, still I feel that your answer is quite useful, and I'm going in that direction only as of now. Okay,
great. Well, sometimes that's helpful to just get some confirmation that, if you're like, I don't know if I'm going the right direction. So to hear somebody else say, I would have taken the same steps, sometimes that's helpful information too. So I'm glad it could be helpful.
I think we can wrap it up. Thanks again, Kelsey, for sharing all your knowledge and experience today. We always appreciate it. And yeah, we'll definitely have an edited version of this on YouTube, and we'll follow up. If you joined on Zoom today, we'll follow up with an email with a link to the recording, all the notes and everything. So you can definitely go back and rewatch and like dive into the blog post and all that kind of stuff on your own time. So you can learn and grow and hopefully apply this yourself. So thanks again, everybody. And we actually have another presentation. Well, we actually do a live stream every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central with Andrew, the CEO of Headway. And it's just an Ask Us Anything. So whatever question you have, we might have some guests join us on certain weeks that are focused on development, product strategy, or product design. But be sure to hop in and ask a question or just listen and learn from other people. Last week, we had some great questions. And hopefully this week you can join us. and it's free. Like there's no questions asked. So if you have a question that you're trying to figure out, or if you're having trouble this week on a project, we're happy to help you get unstuck so you can move forward. So yeah, that's every week on Wednesday. I know next week we have we're talking about feedback loops and how you can continuously take advantage of talking to customers and what you do with all the information to make your products better and make your projects better with teams and feedback analysis. So we're super excited to talk about that with Ryan and Robert from our strategy team. And then the last week in January, we have a conversation about design system promotion. So Billy, head of design at Headway, will be talking about, once you have a design system implemented, or maybe you have an update that needs to go out, like how do you promote that properly to the development team, to the rest of the design team, so that everyone's on the same page and knows what needs to get updated and how to make that happen. So we're super excited to just keep sharing everything about every aspect of building great products. And we hope you can join us each week. So everybody take care and have a great day.